There was a time when Scottie Pippen seemed untouchable. On the court, he was calm, dominant, and respected by millions. As the legendary teammate of Michael Jordan during the Chicago Bulls dynasty, Pippen helped build one of the greatest eras in sports history. Fans saw him as loyal, disciplined, and mentally strong. He was the player who sacrificed individual glory so the team could win championships. But today, many longtime NBA fans are asking the same troubling question. What really happened to Scottie Pippen? Because the man people are seeing now feels very different from the superstar they once admired. Over the past few years, Pippen has appeared in interviews that shocked basketball fans across the world. Instead of celebrating the legacy he helped create, he often sounds frustrated, bitter, and emotionally exhausted. His comments about Michael Jordan, the Bulls organization, and even his own career have sparked endless debate online. Some fans sympathize with him. Others believe he has become consumed by resentment. And honestly, for people who grew up watching the Bulls dominate the NBA, it has been difficult to watch. For decades, Scottie Pippen was considered the perfect teammate. While Jordan was the global icon, Pippen was the engine that kept the team balanced. Coaches trusted him. Teammates respected him. Opponents feared him. He defended the best players in the league, handled pressure without complaining, and delivered in the biggest moments imaginable. Yet despite all of that, many believe Pippen never truly received the recognition he deserved. That feeling appeared to explode after the release of the ESPN documentary, The Last Dance. The series was praised around the world and made Michael Jordan's legacy even larger than before. But Pippen publicly admitted he was deeply unhappy with how he was portrayed. He believed the documentary minimized his contributions and painted him in a negative light while glorifying Jordan at every opportunity. For many viewers, this was the first sign that something inside Scottie Pippen had changed. Suddenly, interviews became tense. Headlines became dramatic. Fans noticed that Pippen no longer seemed interested in protecting old friendships or preserving the image of the Bulls dynasty. Instead, he began openly criticizing Jordan in ways few expected. At one point, he even questioned whether Jordan's success would have been possible without him. Those comments shocked the sports world, not because people doubted Pippen's greatness, but because the emotional pain behind his words was impossible to ignore. It sounded less like trash talk and more like years of frustration finally boiling over. And perhaps that frustration had been building for much longer than anyone realized. Throughout his NBA career, Scottie Pippen was famously underpaid compared to other superstars. While he helped the Bulls win 6 championships, he played under a contract many analysts later described as one of the worst deals ever signed by a superstar athlete. Meanwhile, the NBA exploded financially around him. Other players earned massive contracts. Jordan became a billionaire global brand. But Pippen often seemed stuck in the background, respected yet somehow overlooked. That reality may have left emotional scars that never fully healed. But basketball drama is only part of the story. Behind the headlines and viral interviews, Scottie Pippen has also endured devastating personal tragedy. In 2021, his oldest son, Antron Pippen, passed away unexpectedly at the age of 33. The loss shattered Scottie emotionally. In public statements, he described Antron as kind-hearted, talented, and deeply passionate about basketball. Many fans believe this tragedy changed him forever, because after that loss, Pippen appeared increasingly withdrawn and unpredictable. The confidence that once defined him seemed replaced by sadness and anger. Even during public appearances, fans noticed moments where he looked emotionally distant, as if carrying a weight nobody else could fully understand. And maybe that is what makes his current situation feel so heartbreaking. This is not just the story of a retired athlete struggling with fame. This is the story of a man who spent years sacrificing for others, only to later question whether the world truly appreciated him at all. For younger NBA fans, Scottie Pippen may simply be another legend from the past. But for those who watch the Bulls dynasty unfold in real time, seeing him like this feels deeply unsettling. because the smiling champion holding trophies beside Michael Jordan now seems haunted by the very legacy that once made him immortal. And sadly, many believe the pain Scottie Pippen is carrying today is far from over. What makes Scottie Pippen's situation even more painful is that many fans no longer recognize the man they once admired. During the 1990s, Scottie Pippen represented consistency and composure. He rarely created controversy. He stayed focused on basketball while the spotlight constantly followed Michael Jordan instead. Even when Pippen was frustrated during his playing career, he usually kept those emotions hidden from the public. That version of Scottie felt controlled. But today, many fans see someone who appears emotionally worn down by years of unresolved anger. And the deeper people look into his story, the more understandable that pain becomes. For years, Pippen lived in Jordan's shadow despite being one of the greatest players in NBA history. Analysts often rank him among the best defenders ever, yet conversations about the Bulls dynasty almost always centered around Jordan alone. Even though Scottie was essential to all 6 championships, the public narrative rarely treated him as an equal part of the dynasty. Some believe that slowly damaged him over time. Imagine sacrificing your personal statistics, your spotlight, and sometimes even your ego for the success of a team, only to spend decades watching history credit someone else almost entirely. That kind of emotional burden can stay with a person forever. And then came the internet era. Old debates about the Bulls suddenly returned stronger than ever. Clips from The Last Dance flooded social media. Younger fans who never watched the 1990s Bulls began forming opinions based almost entirely on the documentary. Once again, Jordan was celebrated as a flawless icon, while Pippen was often reduced to the sidekick. For Scottie, that may have felt humiliating, especially because many former players privately admitted the Bulls could never have dominated the league without him. Some even argued that Pippen's versatility transformed the entire modern concept of basketball defense. But public praise never seemed enough to heal his frustration. Instead, his interviews became increasingly uncomfortable to watch. Fans noticed moments where Pippen sounded deeply resentful, not just toward Jordan, but toward the basketball world itself. At times, he appeared determined to rewrite history. At other times, he seemed like someone still desperately searching for recognition after all these years. And perhaps the saddest part is that none of it changes what he accomplished. Scottie Pippen is already an NBA legend. 6 championships, 7-time All-Star, Olympic gold medalist, Hall of Famer, one of the greatest two-way players the sport has ever seen. Yet he often sounds like a man who still feels invisible. That contradiction is what makes this story so tragic, because success does not always bring peace. In fact, many former athletes struggle once the cheering stops. During their careers, their lives are built around competition, structure, and public admiration. But retirement can become emotionally dangerous. The attention disappears. The purpose changes. The world moves on faster than expected. For someone like Scottie Pippen, whose identity was tied so closely to winning and legacy, that transition may have been especially painful. And unfortunately, public scrutiny only made it worse. Every interview became a headline. Every emotional comment turned into a viral debate. Sports media dissected his words constantly, with some fans mocking him while others defended him. Instead of being remembered quietly as a basketball icon, Pippen became trapped inside endless internet arguments about the past. It is almost as if he can never escape the Bulls era. Even his personal life has remained under heavy public attention. His relationships, family matters, and financial stories have repeatedly become tabloid content over the years. For many celebrities, fame eventually fades enough to allow privacy. But for sports legends connected to iconic dynasties, the spotlight never fully disappears. And for Scottie, that spotlight now feels colder than ever. Some fans believe he is simply bitter. Others believe he is heartbroken. But regardless of opinion, one thing is clear. The confident superstar from the 1990s now appears emotionally exhausted by carrying decades of disappointment, grief, and unresolved resentment. There are moments during interviews where Scottie Pippen almost seems torn between wanting recognition and wanting peace. He speaks like someone trying to convince the world, and perhaps himself, that his sacrifices truly mattered. And they absolutely did. Without Scottie Pippen, the Chicago Bulls dynasty would not exist as fans remember it today. Even Michael Jordan himself once admitted that there would be no championships without Pippen beside him. But sometimes recognition arrives too late to heal emotional wounds. That is why so many longtime NBA fans feel uneasy watching Scottie now. They're not just watching a retired athlete age in public. They are watching a man wrestle with legacy, grief, and the painful fear of being forgotten. And sadly, the more he speaks about the past, the more it feels like those old wounds are only getting deeper. Perhaps the most heartbreaking part of Scottie Pippen's story is that deep down, many fans believe he never truly wanted fame in the first place. Unlike other superstars who chased cameras and headlines, Scottie Pippen always appeared quieter, more reserved, and less comfortable with celebrity culture. During the Chicago Bulls dynasty, he rarely tried to dominate interviews or make himself the center of attention. He simply played basketball at an elite level and helped his team win. But over time, that quiet personality may have worked against him. Because in modern sports culture, the loudest voices are often remembered the most. While Michael Jordan became one of the most famous athletes in human history, Pippen slowly became viewed by younger generations as merely the other guy. To longtime NBA fans, that label feels incredibly unfair. Many analysts have argued that Scottie was decades ahead of his time, a player capable of guarding every position while also running the offense like a point guard. In today's NBA, a player with Pippen's skill set would likely be treated as the face of an entire franchise. But during the 1990s, he spent much of his career sacrificing individual attention for the sake of winning. And maybe now, years later, he is finally confronting what those sacrifices cost him emotionally. There is also another painful reality many people overlook. Athletes often struggle when their identity becomes trapped in the past. For Scottie Pippen, nearly every public conversation eventually circles back to the Bulls dynasty. No matter what he does, the world continues asking him about Jordan, championships, or old controversies from decades ago. Imagine living with that every day. No matter how much time passes, people still define you by moments from your 20s and 30s. The world freezes you in history while your real life continues becoming more complicated, more painful, and more human. That can become emotionally exhausting. Some fans noticed this especially during recent interviews where Pippen appeared emotionally detached or frustrated. There were moments when his body language seemed tired, almost defeated. Instead of sounding proud about his legacy, he often sounded like someone fighting against history itself. And maybe that is because he feels history forgot part of the truth. After all, Scottie Pippen was not just a role player beside Michael Jordan. He was arguably the second most important figure of the entire Bulls dynasty. When Jordan temporarily retired from basketball in 1993, it was Pippen who kept Chicago competitive. He nearly carried the team to the Eastern Conference Finals by himself and finished third in MVP voting. For many basketball experts, that season proved Scottie could lead a championship-level team on his own. Yet somehow, that part of his legacy is rarely discussed by casual fans today. Instead, internet culture reduced him to memes, controversy, and viral headlines. That disconnect between reality and public perception may explain why Pippen sometimes sounds angry during interviews. It may not simply be jealousy toward Jordan. It could be frustration that his own story has been simplified beyond recognition. And sadly, social media only intensifies those feelings. Every emotional comment becomes content. Every disagreement becomes entertainment. Clips of Pippen criticizing former teammates spread online within minutes, often without context. Millions of people judge his emotional state based on short viral moments rather than the full complexity of his life. For someone already carrying grief and disappointment, that kind of public scrutiny can become overwhelming. And then there is the issue of aging itself. Professional athletes spend their entire lives being admired for physical greatness. But eventually, time catches everyone. The explosive speed disappears. The athletic body changes. Public attention fades. Younger generations move on to new stars. For many retired athletes, this transition creates loneliness that fans never see. In Scottie Pippen's case, the contrast feels especially dramatic because he was once viewed as nearly unstoppable. Watching someone who looked so powerful now appear emotionally vulnerable creates a strange sadness for fans who grew up idolizing him. It reminds people that even legends are human. And perhaps beneath all the controversy, that is what Scottie Pippen truly wants people to understand. Not the championships, not the arguments, not the comparisons with Jordan, but the fact that behind the legendary career is a man who experienced loss, pressure, sacrifice, and emotional pain just like anyone else. Unfortunately, fame rarely allows public figures to heal privately. Every time Scottie speaks honestly, the media turns it into another dramatic headline. Every emotional reaction becomes proof to critics that he is bitter or unstable. But very few people stop to ask a deeper question. What if Scottie Pippen is simply tired? Tired of defending his legacy? Tired of reliving the same history? Tired of feeling overlooked despite accomplishing more than most athletes could ever dream of? Because when people look closely at him now, they do not just see a basketball icon growing older. They see a man still searching for peace after spending most of his life fighting to prove his value to the world. What many people forget is that Scottie Pippen's rise to greatness was never supposed to happen in the first place. Long before the championships, the fame, and the endless debates about Michael Jordan, Scottie Pippen came from an incredibly humble background. He grew up in a large family with very little money, in a small town where almost nobody expected him to become a global sports icon. Even physically, he was overlooked for years. Colleges barely noticed him at first, and scouts did not view him as a future superstar. Everything Scottie achieved came through patience, sacrifice, and relentless work. That is part of what makes his current emotional state feel so tragic. Because people who fight the hardest to earn respect are often the ones most hurt when they feel forgotten later in life. Pippen spent decades building a legacy that most athletes could only dream about. He became an Olympic champion, an NBA Hall of Famer, and one of the defining players of an entire basketball generation. But despite all those accomplishments, there is still a strange sadness surrounding the way people discuss him today. It often feels like his greatness comes with an asterisk. Fans say things like, he was great because of Jordan. He needed the Bulls system. He could never be the main guy. And while critics continue debating his legacy, Scottie himself appears increasingly frustrated trying to defend it. That frustration became painfully visible during several recent interviews and podcast appearances. Instead of looking relaxed or proud about his career, Pippen often appeared tense, guarded, and emotionally drained. Some viewers even described him as deeply unhappy. And honestly, it is not hard to understand why. Imagine spending your entire life chasing greatness, only to realize history remembers someone else more clearly than it remembers you. For many retired athletes, the emotional pain of aging is not physical decline, it is invisibility. The applause fades. The phone stops ringing. The media moves on. And eventually, even your greatest achievements become old highlights on YouTube. For Scottie Pippen, this may feel even worse because his career was tied to one of the most famous athletes who ever lived. As long as Jordan remains a global icon, Pippen's identity will always be connected to comparisons he can never fully escape. That kind of shadow can become emotionally suffocating over time. But there may be another reason Scottie seems so emotionally conflicted today. Deep down, he may feel betrayed by the very system he helped build. During the Bulls dynasty, Pippen repeatedly sacrificed personal opportunities for the success of the team. He defended elite scorers every night. He accepted less media attention. He stayed loyal to the organization despite contract frustrations. He did everything people say a great teammate should do. Yet years later, he watched others receive most of the glory. For someone carrying decades of emotional sacrifice, that realization can slowly turn into resentment. And resentment is dangerous because it changes the way people remember themselves. Instead of looking back proudly, they begin replaying every moment they felt overlooked. Every insult becomes bigger. Every disappointment feels personal. Every old wound reopens. That is exactly what many fans now see happening with Scottie Pippen. At times, it almost feels like he is trapped in an emotional battle against his own memories. And sadly, public reaction has not always been compassionate. Social media can be brutal toward aging celebrities, especially athletes. The internet rarely allows people to evolve peacefully. Instead, it constantly compares who they are now to who they used to be. Every emotional interview becomes a meme. Every vulnerable moment becomes entertainment. For Scottie, that pressure may only deepen the loneliness. Because beneath all the headlines and controversy, there are signs that he is still grieving far more than basketball. Losing his son Antron was a devastating tragedy that likely changed his emotional world forever. Anyone who has experienced deep personal loss understands how dramatically it can affect perspective, relationships, and mental well-being. Sometimes grief makes people quieter. Other times, it makes unresolved pain impossible to hide anymore. And perhaps that is why Scottie Pippen now seems so emotionally exposed in public. The walls he spent years building around himself may no longer be strong enough to contain everything he has carried for decades. That is why many longtime fans no longer see him simply as a controversial former athlete. They see someone struggling with aging, grief, legacy, and emotional exhaustion all at once. And honestly, that combination can break even the strongest people. Because no amount of championships protects someone from loneliness. No amount of fame guarantees inner peace. And no legendary career can erase the human need to feel appreciated and understood. Today, when fans watch Scottie Pippen speak, they are not just hearing the words of a retired basketball player. They are hearing the pain of a man who spent his entire life proving his greatness and still fears the world never fully recognized it. There's another reason why Scottie Pippen's story resonates so deeply with people today. His pain feels real. In an era where celebrities carefully manage their public image, Scottie Pippen often appears completely unfiltered. He does not always sound polished. He does not always hide his emotions. Sometimes he speaks with visible frustration, and other times he looks emotionally drained before he even answers a question. That rawness makes audiences uncomfortable, because people are used to sports legends pretending everything is fine. Most retired athletes protect their legacy carefully. They smile during interviews, praise former teammates, and avoid conflict whenever possible. But Scottie seems unable or unwilling to hide how he truly feels anymore. And maybe that honesty is exactly why his situation feels so heartbreaking. For decades, basketball fans viewed the Chicago Bulls dynasty as a perfect story. Chicago Bulls represented greatness, dominance, and global success. Michael Jordan became the symbol of winning itself. The documentaries, commercials, and highlights created an almost mythological version of that era. But Scottie Pippen's recent comments shattered part of that illusion. Instead of remembering the dynasty as pure glory, he often speaks about disrespect, unfair treatment, and emotional sacrifice. Listening to him now, the Bulls era sounds less like a dream and more like a complicated emotional burden he has carried for years. That contrast shocks fans because it changes how they see basketball history. And perhaps even more importantly, it changes how they see Scottie himself. For years, people assumed he was content being the loyal second star beside Jordan. But what if he was silently struggling the entire time? What if he spent years suppressing feelings that only surfaced after retirement? That possibility makes many fans rethink everything. There is one particular detail that continues to haunt discussions about Scottie Pippen: Despite all his achievements, he often seems desperate to remind people how valuable he really was. Not rich, not famous, valuable. Those are very different things. Fame can bring money and attention, but it does not always bring emotional fulfillment. Some people can win championships and still feel emotionally unseen. They can stand beside greatness every day and still wonder whether the world truly appreciated their sacrifices. When Scotty speaks today, that emotional conflict feels impossible to ignore. At times, he sounds proud of his accomplishments. At other times, he sounds wounded by them. And maybe both feelings exist simultaneously. What makes this even sadder is that many younger fans only know Scotty through controversy now. Instead of remembering his incredible defense, leadership, and versatility, they know him from dramatic headlines or clips criticizing Michael Jordan. His emotional struggles have started overshadowing the brilliance of his actual basketball career. That may be one of the cruelest parts of aging in public. Your lowest moments can slowly replace your greatest ones in the eyes of the audience. And unfortunately, social media rewards negativity more than legacy. Every painful quote becomes viral content because controversy spreads faster than appreciation. The internet constantly asks, why is Scotty so bitter? Why can't he move on? Why does he keep talking about Jordan? But very few people ask whether unresolved emotional pain might be driving those reactions. Because moving on is not always simple, especially when someone's entire identity became tied to sacrifice and comparison. Scottie Pippen spent most of his basketball life proving himself against impossible expectations. He entered the NBA overlooked, became a superstar through relentless work, then spent years hearing that he was still not as important as the player beside him. Eventually, that can change how a person sees themselves. And perhaps now, after retirement, those insecurities have become louder than ever before. There are moments where Scotty almost appears trapped between wanting validation and wanting freedom from the past altogether. He revisits old stories repeatedly, as if still searching for closure that never came. But closure is difficult when millions of people continue debating your legacy every single day online. For fans who admired him growing up, this has become emotionally difficult to witness. Because they remember a different Scottie Pippen. They remember the calm competitor, the elite defender, the fearless teammate, the player who never seemed emotionally shaken under pressure. Seeing that same man now appear vulnerable, angry, and emotionally exhausted forces fans to confront something uncomfortable about fame itself. Sometimes the people who look strongest publicly are fighting private battles nobody fully understands. And perhaps that is the real tragedy of Scottie Pippen's story. Not that he lost money, not that he argued with Michael Jordan, not even that his reputation became controversial. The real tragedy may be that after spending an entire lifetime achieving greatness, he still seems unable to find peace with his own legacy. Today, many fans no longer watch Scottie Pippen with excitement or admiration alone. They watch him with concern. Because behind every interview, every emotional comment, and every painful headline, there are signs of a man still struggling to heal from decades of pressure, sacrifice, grief, and disappointment. And sadly, the deeper people look into his life now, the harder it becomes to ignore just how much pain may still be there. What makes Scottie Pippen's story especially tragic is that many people can actually relate to it, even outside of basketball. Because at its core, this is not just about sports. It is about what happens when someone spends their entire life sacrificing for success, only to later wonder whether any of it truly brought happiness. Scottie Pippen achieved almost everything society tells people to chase: fame, wealth, championships, respect, global recognition. Millions of fans around the world once viewed him as one of the greatest athletes alive. And yet today, he often appears emotionally restless, as though something inside him still feels unresolved. That reality unsettles people because it challenges the fantasy surrounding celebrity life. Fans assume legends eventually find peace. They imagine retired superstars enjoying luxury, admiration, and fulfillment forever. But Scotty's public appearances tell a very different story. Instead of looking liberated by success, he often looks burdened by it. And perhaps that burden has followed him longer than anyone realized. One of the most painful aspects of Scotty's career was how often he had to suppress his own identity for the good of the team. During the Bulls dynasty, he accepted being viewed as Robin to Jordan's Batman. At the time, fans celebrated that role because winning championships made everything appear perfect. But emotionally, years of comparison can slowly damage even the strongest people. Imagine constantly hearing that you are great, but never quite great enough. That you are essential, but still secondary. Famous, but still overlooked. Respected, but never fully celebrated. Over time, those contradictions can create deep emotional frustration. And many fans now believe that frustration is finally surfacing after decades of silence. What makes it even more difficult is that Scotty's personality was never naturally suited for nonstop media attention. Unlike some former athletes who enjoy staying in the spotlight after retirement, Pippen often appears uncomfortable with modern celebrity culture. Yet, ironically, controversy keeps pulling him back into headlines. Every emotional statement becomes national sports news. Every criticism of Michael Jordan sparks another wave of debate. Every interview becomes another public examination of his emotional state. It is almost as if the world refuses to let him quietly move on. And maybe that is exactly why he seems exhausted. There are moments during interviews where Scotty looks less angry than simply tired. Tired of comparisons. Tired of defending himself. Tired of reliving the same emotional battles over and over again. For fans who grew up admiring him, those moments are genuinely hard to watch, because they remember a player who once looked mentally indestructible. On the basketball court, Pippen controlled games with intelligence and confidence. He guarded the best scorers in the league without fear. He played through pressure most people could never handle. In many ways, he represented emotional discipline. But retirement changes athletes in ways fans rarely understand. Once competition disappears, buried emotions often rise to the surface. The structure that once gave life purpose suddenly vanishes. Instead of focusing on games and championships, retired athletes are left alone with memories, regrets, disappointments, and unresolved pain. For Scottie Pippen, that transition may have been devastating, especially because his public identity remained frozen in the past. No matter where he goes, fans still see him as part of the Chicago Bulls dynasty. The world constantly reminds him of the greatest years of his life, while simultaneously debating whether he mattered enough during them. That emotional contradiction could wear down anyone. And sadly, personal tragedy likely intensified everything. The death of his son Antron was not just another sad headline. It was a life-changing emotional loss. People close to grief often describe feeling emotionally altered forever afterward. The world continues moving while part of them remains stuck in pain. Some fans believe that after losing his son, Scotty stopped caring about hiding his emotions publicly. The emotional filter disappeared. Years of suppressed frustration, sadness, and disappointment suddenly became visible to everyone. If that is true, then many of the controversial interviews people mock online may actually reveal someone still struggling internally. And that changes the way many fans see him now. Instead of viewing Scotty as bitter, they see someone emotionally overwhelmed by decades of pressure and loss. A man who spent his entire career helping others shine, yet now feels haunted by the fear that his own contributions were never fully understood. That fear seems to follow him everywhere. Even when discussing championships, there is often sadness in his voice. Even when discussing success, there is frustration underneath. Even when discussing history, there is pain that still feels fresh. And perhaps that is why so many people say watching Scottie Pippen today feels heartbreaking. Not because he failed, but because after achieving more than almost anyone ever will, he still appears trapped in a lifelong search for validation peace, and emotional closure. And the hardest part is realizing that he may never fully find it.